Right. Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks so much for taking the time out to join us today. I know my screen says Lewis, but that's my married name, Liz Webster, I'm mostly known as. Just over a year ago, we launched Séan Rickard's report about what the Brexit threat meant for agriculture. And the response was quite shocked, and it seemed as if it was a very pessimistic view. I think as every month or every day now that goes by, it's absolutely clear that Séan was bang on the money, and it certainly looks like we're at no deal, or even if there is a last-minute deal, it's going to be so minimal that it's going to be the same as no deal for agriculture. And the purpose of calling this today is really that I think there's been so much information out there that a lot of farmers aren't really, and of course at this time of year we're busy, we've had terrible weather for the last year, and the reality of what confronts us isn't really being faced. We're not having any help to actually say, well, what is going to happen to us? And particularly for those of us that are in livestock, the future looks pretty bleak when you're thinking, am I going to be able to sell any stock next year? How much for? Is anybody going to want it? And all of those things going forward. And really there is no clear position available from the government or really from any other agency as to what we face, because it's all, well, let's hope we get a deal. So I thought we'd pull everyone together and get Séan to give us his wise opinion. And then also we've got Andrew Brown, who's another farmer, and hopefully Jim Beary will join us, and Andrew Ward, who's out combining at the moment, to just give their feelings about how they're feeling, because what we want is for farmers to really start waking up and getting the public aware of what this means for the country, for our agriculture to be absolutely decimated. So on that note, I will pass you over to Séan.
Well, I'm hoping that really people are going to have some questions for me, because I feel I'm in a better position in understanding where you're coming from if you ask me questions. But I'll start with a few words. Who'd have thought? Who'd have thought back in 2016 we would be here today wondering if we are about to end up with no deal Brexit? I suppose I'm slightly embarrassed here because I never thought we'd ever contemplate a no-deal Brexit, and I still find it very difficult to believe that even members of the government will. But let us just be clear what's now on the table, because the government have changed their position on tariffs. A year ago, this position was that if we had no deal with big tariffs against all our exports to Europe in terms of food and agricultural products, and we would face next to no tariffs on imports coming in here. Now, the government changed their mind earlier this year, and the situation now is that if there was no deal, the tariffs would go on both exports and imports in the short term, and food prices would rise. I guess what I find incredible about that, just incredible, is that any sane government would, in the middle of a COVID recession, when unemployment is going to rise, when people are going to be struggling to feed their families, contemplating seeing a significant rise in food prices over the course of 2021, beggars belief. And I suppose that leads us to think that the government's on the back foot, and the government really will end up agreeing to a very basic trade deal, which will more or less remove tariffs on food. That will stop the food prices going up, but of course it doesn't remove all the non-tariff barriers, all the checks and balances, all the paperwork, all the additional costs that are going to go on trade with the EU. And I've long been of the view that the people will pay for that. The people who will pay for that ultimately will be farmers. I'm sure those costs will be passed down the chain to farmers. Well, also, when we wrote our report about a year ago, what we were highlighting more than anything else was not so much the deal or no deal with Europe, it was the threat from third country trade deals. And you've seen what has happened in the last year. A number of people, allegedly from George Eustace down, who really should have known better, have woken up to what third country trade deals could mean for agriculture. In other words, cheap food pouring in here from countries like America, Brazil, Australia, New Zealand, and therefore replacing domestic food production. The NFU's hopes of being able to prevent that via putting the emphasis on standards has been shown up to be just a sham. I mean, not from the NFU, I hasten to add, but the government. The government talk about protecting standards, but when they were asked to legislate on it in their agricultural bill, they refused to do it. And why did they refuse? Because they know as well as we that if they ever did that, that would be the end of Brexit and third countries. America will do no trade deal with us if it can't get its agricultural products into our country. They know that, and therefore the last thing they're going to do is actually legislate to prevent that happening. Now, as it turns out, it looks as though there's no chance of an American trade deal this year now. That's also gone. But the point remains that come January, the government will be in a position to start doing trade deals with countries around the world, and the fears we raised a year ago will continue to apply. They just may take a little longer before they come to fruition, but we are facing a shrinking of the agricultural industry, and I put it to you that if you look carefully at the agricultural bill, it's more to do with land management than food production. The government is implicitly saying to the industry, yes, you start looking after the land, we'll rely on other people for our food. And that is the danger that I think we have to wake up to for those who care about the agricultural industry and indeed the domestic agri-food chain. Remember, the food industry is the largest manufacturing sector in this country, and at the moment 70% of its raw materials come from British agriculture. The stakes here are very high, and I'm not sure that people appreciate yet just how big the threat is to farming. I think I'll leave it at that. I hope that's enough, and I hope some people have got questions, or perhaps other people have got other things they want to say.
Okay, well, let's move. What I'll do quickly, if you don't mind, I want to just move on to Andrew Brown, who can introduce himself and talk about how it's affecting him and what, you know, how he's feeling about his business. And then we'll once we've done those introductions, then we'll come back to some questions.
Okay, thanks, Liz. Some of you already know who I am. I'm a farmer in Rutland, 60% arable, 40% permanent pasture. Major concerns with this ag bill, as Sean pointed out, is that they refuse to legislate that lower food standard products can't come in to this country. And it seems to me that all the people that we're talking to do trade deals such as Canada, America, Australia, New Zealand, etc., all those countries have agricultural products in vast excess, which they will be able to pour into this country below our cost of production. So I'm very concerned about that. I'm also concerned about any tariffs that might go on to our export products. I mean, if there's a 20 quid tariff on a ton of wheat, that's going to put me at or below cost of production if I'm not careful. And speaking to agricultural merchants and traders, when asked who's going to pay this tariff, and they say, well, we'll just pass it on down the chain. And of course, the primary producer will be the person that ultimately pays the tariff. So major concerns, how are they going to stop agricultural products, maybe if they don't let them in onto the supermarket shelves, how are they going to stop them coming into through ready meals, etc. You can have a ready meal that's got products in it from 20 different countries. How are you going to work that out with tariffs, etc.? It will be a logistical and administrative nightmare. I've got no idea how they're going to do that. I don't think they have. They seem to be making it up as they go along. I mean, if they want me to plant the whole of my farm with pollen and nectar mix, and there's a margin in that better than growing wheat, then that's what I'll do. But it is a very dangerous precedent to set when you've got nearly 70 million people living on a small group of islands, and you're going to start importing all your food. A, there aren't enough deep water ports in this country to offload it. B, there's not enough trucks to take it away from all the ships if they're going to import it all. And C, there isn't enough sheds to put it all in. So I think importing all our food and turning us into all bird and bee farmers is a non-starter. But as Sean said, this ag bill seems to be going down that route. And to not mention food really in an agricultural bill is just ludicrous.
Thank you, Andrew. I don't know if we've had, is Jim on yet? Jim?
Nope.
No. Okay, well, we're still waiting for Jim. Jim has actually got a red tractor inspection, and the inspector's still there, so that's why he's late. And our other Andrew Ward will be joining us in a bit. So if we can go on to questions for Sean and for Andrew, or and me, if you want me to answer anything, that would be great. So if people want to put their hand up, whoever's got the first question, and we can begin.
It's Johan Tasker from Farmers Weekly here. Could I ask Sean how many farmers he thinks will go out of business if we have a no-deal Brexit?
Oh dear, people are always interested in that figure, which of course has to be speculative. I've always tried to make the point that it's not what happens in the first month or the first year, it's the direction of travel over the next several years. If you look at the farm business accounts, it would appear that something like half of farms are already not profitable, and they're certainly going to be less profitable under both the agricultural bill and indeed under future trade negotiations. It's very, very difficult to be precise, but I would be prepared to say that in the event of no deal, you'd lose at least, guarantee over the next 5 years, you'll lose a third of farmers and probably more. But be careful, that doesn't amount to a third of production. I suspect that the people who are most vulnerable are what I would call smaller full-time farms. We've got an awful lot of farms in this country that are hobby or part-time. They earn their living in other sectors of the economy, and they're not particularly vulnerable, those people. It's a way of life for them. And then you've got what I call the larger scale efficient farms that are pretty low cost and are in the strongest position to survive. The people who are most vulnerable are those smaller full-time farms who at the moment are hanging on, supported by the direct payments, and who are going to lose those payments and probably will not make that income up in the payments from the government, and they'll vanish, I think.
I agree with Sean. I think the most vulnerable are the small to medium family-sized farms. Mine's 620 acres. That's nowhere near big enough to survive going forward. I mean, we've been farming in this area for about 300 years and have survived 2 world wars, recessions, all that sort of thing, previous pandemics, and this may see the end of it. But I think the danger is you lose that local knowledge with the flora and fauna of the area, because farmers generally know exactly what's going on their farm, and that will go. Plus, a lot of them are sort of the people that will help out at the local fete. They'll provide fields for they'll do lots of things in the local community that again don't get rewarded by the marketplace, and you're going to lose that. People are often saying to me, you need to be more efficient. Well, I can be much more efficient by pushing all my hedges out, flattening all my ridges and furrows, and growing wall-to-wall wheat. And then they throw their hands up in horror and say, oh, we don't want that. Well, you can't have it both ways. You either, you know, want me to be efficient, or you want me to look after the countryside. You can't have it both ways. And it's this sort of size farm that is the most vulnerable, because I'm too big really to go and get another job, because I do it all on my own, so I can't get another job to supplement my income. We have diversified into holiday lets, and we've got a solar array on a roof. But as I always say, my best bit of diversification was marrying a lawyer. So that's my diversification product.
Thanks, Andrew. Thanks, Sean.
I think if I could just say very quickly, we should just draw attention to two other points. One is that regionally, the impact will not be the same. I think that very vulnerable are going to be farms in the remoter areas and the uplands to no deal, or even the sort of deals we've spoken about over the longer term. And of course, there's going to be a discrepancy between farmers in England and Wales and farmers in Northern Ireland, who are going to be allowed to more or less carry on as though they're still members of the EU. And we've yet to see what the devolved administrations in Scotland and Wales actually do for their farmers. So I think really English farmers will have quite a lot to be concerned about under this new regime.
You could be looking at a different payment scheme in the different countries of the UK. So you could be competing within your own country. I mean, that is just ludicrous.
Okay, any more questions?
Yes, I've got a question. Mike Goldsworthy here from March for Change. And that is, out of the different routes available to protect British farming and food standards and animal welfare, is it more realistic that that happens A, through the new Trade and Agriculture Commission getting more teeth, B, through something getting proposed in the House of Lords that MPs actually take up, or C, through the government being too scared to actually do a trade deal at this stage that undermines all of this, so there being more time or modifications later on?
Can I just ask you to repeat your first point again? I didn't quite catch that. First of your questions.
Yeah, so it was just one question about what is the most effective route to stopping the undermining of British farming, food standards and animal welfare. Is it in Liz Truss's Trade and Agriculture Commission, or is it through amendments coming through the House of Lords and Commons on the agriculture bill, or are there any other mechanisms further down the line that can be used?
Let me have a go at that, and no doubt Andrew will and perhaps Liz will have things to say. I apologise for being old and cynical, but I'm afraid I rather view things such as, you know, the so-called commission, this trust, and perhaps even Henry Dimbleby's food strategy policies as being deflections. What we really need, if we are serious about helping agriculture, given that Brexit is a reality and this is the new future, we really should have a food policy, not a land management policy. We should have a food policy that spells out exactly how the government are going to help agriculture and its main customers, you know, to compete in this very different environment. And I have to say if you did it on the basis of number of lines in the agricultural bill, you will see the number that are devoted to food amounts to less than half a page out of, I think, 84 pages. So I think you get the drift of where the government is going. I don't think the government, here's my problem. I don't think the government can give in on this, because they've held out to all their supporters and indeed the population that they're going to get Brexit done. And they know that getting Brexit done, they said they're going to have these marvelous trade deals with countries like America and around the world. If you believe that they are prepared to give that up at this stage, well, then perhaps you will get a solution via the agricultural bill and an amendment to it. I'm afraid I judge they can't possibly do that. They're as good as saying they've led everyone up the garden path. So they've got to press on. It's got to be Brexit or bust. And my view is that the best you can hope is some sort of a preamble or whatever to the agricultural bill, setting out that the priority is a competitive food industry, which will at least allow the industry in the future to keep bringing back the government to what they said in the preamble to the bill, and trying to hold their feet to the fire. But unless you think Brexit is going to be reversed and reality as it is not, and the government can't back off, then you should be preparing the industry for the mess they've got it into. And that's what they're not doing. They're buying people off. They're more or less saying, we'll give you some money for public goods, go away. We're going to import more food. And that's not good enough. And it needs to be said loudly and clearly.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, that commission thing they've set up, I think in the final line, it says it's only advisory, so it doesn't have any teeth at all, so they can just ignore it. If we were living in France now, there'd be riots on the streets. There'd be tractors going up and down every major town. There'd be slinging muck everywhere, emptying milk all over the place. We're far too soft as a farming industry, and it never ceases to amaze me why farmers keep on voting Conservative when they shaft farmers all the time. It's just remarkable. But I mean, with an 80 majority in the House of Commons, it's very difficult to get anything through. And people often say to me, oh, they always look after the farmers, the Tories, to which I would answer, they will look after the farmers the same as they looked after the miners, the steel workers and the car makers, because they do not care.
You're muted, Liz. You're muted.
I grew up in South Wales and I experienced the decimation of the coal and steel industry firsthand. And that's why I left Wales, really, because there was no work there, and went to work in London. Many of my friends had the choice of moving to Germany to get work, but obviously all of those options are closed off to us now. And I do think that, if you really focus on what's going on, it is a very, very dangerous position. And I think that's perhaps why people are just doing this keep calm and carrying on, because the thought of not being able to trade or not knowing how we're going to trade next year, when you deal particularly in livestock as we've got here, what happens if you can't get rid of your stock next year? I mean, we're looking at very, very uncomfortable realities, and you keep thinking, well, surely something will happen to stop it happening. But we're on a train and we're moving towards a cliff edge, and it is going to, the worst is going to happen. And I absolutely agree that the Commission is just a pacifier. It just keeps everybody happy, and they're quite happy for us to be sitting here thinking, no, they won't really do it. But I think Sean is right. Every indicator, at every point, every chance to change anything, they've continued on with what looks like will keep them quiet and will continue with no deal. But
the only way we'll be able to compete is to intensify. And when when they tried to build that big dairy farm up in Nocton in North Lincolnshire, which was going to be very efficient, very environmentally friendly, and the fact that people didn't like was that the cows weren't going to go outside, and there was lots of them all in the same place. They threw their hands up in horror and said, oh, we don't want that, that's terrible. Well, what do you want? Pay you twice as much for your food then? I mean, this half the trouble is food is far too cheap. If it wasn't as cheap as it is now, in real terms never been cheaper, then people would treat it with a bit more respect and treat farmers with a bit more respect and think, well, actually, we might need these guys.
Thank you. Any more questions? Jim? Hello, Jim.
Jim, you're on mute.
Hello, can you hear me now?
That's Jim Beary.
Hello.
He's here. I can see you there, Jim.
Yeah, sorry.
Sorry, our other farmer is with us now, Jim Beary. So you're here, Jim, to talk about how you're feeling and how you think Brexit is affecting your farm and how you feel about the future, because you missed the beginning bit.
Yeah, sorry about that. Can you hear me okay?
Yes. How did your inspection go?
It's ongoing, but I managed to sneak away. So, yeah, obviously we're entirely livestock farm here, so I'm rather concerned. Most of our stock are on contract to retailers, but I don't think that's a safety net in any way, because retailers will use any excuse to drop prices. So I think a hard Brexit will give them an excuse to do that. I don't really understand why so many people are burying their head in the sand, as you just alluded to before. When we've got a lot riding on this. Tariffs on lamb and beef could cripple a lot of people. In 4 years' time, we're also looking at half our BPS payments going away. I don't think any of the new environmental schemes are going to deliver the income that we currently get. So the future ahead of us is very rocky at the moment, and I just don't understand why Brexit seems to be being done under the radar at the moment, and no one's kicking up a fuss about it. That's pretty much how I feel about it at the moment.
Well, I went to a meeting with Michael Gove in the Farmers Club, that was 18 months ago now, and he said that they were thinking of allowing farmers to take all their basic payment scheme in one go for the last 5 years or 7 years or whatever it is. And that, of course, everyone pricked their ears up and said, well, that's marvellous. But of course, with it going down from 100% to zero over that period, it isn't actually 7 years at all. It's 3.5 years worth, isn't it? So, that is, that is just another con that they're trying to get through, saying, oh, you can have 7 years worth in one go. Well, you won't, because it's going down from 100% to nothing. So in reality, it's only half of it.
Well, I think that's designed to try and help some farmers actually exit the industry rather than help people carry on. It's like a golden sort of handshake, on your way, and we'll have a few less farmers.
Yeah, well, what'll happen is they'll go and buy a new tractor.
Probably.
Jim's right. It's not a new idea. I mean, it was proposed by the German economist about 20 years ago. It's a bond scheme, essentially. You take your money and you run. And because you'll have to pay for the risk out of it. But yes, it's a way of getting farmers out of the industry. And I really think you've only got to look in the literature, the small print of the ERG experts, or the so-called experts. They lined up to advise them on Brexit. And it says there, agriculture will be decimated. They didn't lie. They knew exactly what was going to happen. And you're the sacrificial lamb. You're going to be sacrificed for trade deals with the likes of America and the rest. And that has always been the reality. And it's rather late in the day, I think, for people to wake up to that. After all, one is led to believe that something like half the farming industry voted for Brexit. God knows what they were thinking of the day they did that, but there we are.
Okay, any more questions from our journalists? Yep. Peter?
Can you hear me?
Yep.
To what extent, Sean, will any policies like the public's desire for environmental goods have a pressure on the government in this country, do you think?
I really think it's minimal. I think the government has gone so far as to say that Brexit meant an American trade deal, etc. This is the big totem. They have to deliver on that, and that they must know in their heart that that can only be delivered if we adopt American standards. Doesn't mean to say that there won't be public money for public goods. It just means that you know, the government will point to the public funding that they are giving to farmers to protect the environment, but they will separate from that food policy, which they will say it meets all the equivalent standards to us. That's the way they'll get around it, and they'll import food. You've got to remember something. It's true that a lot of people are concerned about the environment and climate change. But when you're unemployed, when you're a single parent family, when you're on a low income, and when you're in that supermarket thinking about how you're going to feed people, price is all important. And what the government is counting on is that, listen to Jacob Rees-Mogg whenever he talks about this. He says Brexit will deliver lower food price. What does he mean? He means we're going to import cheap food. And even if the supermarkets today say, well, of course, we won't sell it, the service industries, the Kentucky Fried Chickens, all that, it'll pour into those areas. And eventually, of course, supermarkets will also start to sell it. So it's rather hopeless, really, I think, for agriculture to think it can put up barriers. Essentially, if you say, oh, we're not going to import this stuff because we've got higher standards and we want the government to put up barriers, that is as good as saying we don't want Brexit. And I've said, I don't think that's realistic. So your only solution is to accept another basic truth. There is no fundamental contradiction between an efficient farmer and delivering a high quality environment and high quality standards, but they must be helped to do it. And what we need is a food policy which recognizes that truth, encourages the science and technology that will help us to compete in world markets. Because, you know, British food production has a lot going for it in world markets, insofar as people are now very keen on so-called credence attributes, you know, provenance, safety, mentioned yourself, environmental standards. There is a huge middle class around the world. You know, there's 4 billion of them by the next 5 or 6 years. There's an awful lot of people who might be prepared to buy British food if only we geared ourselves up and believed in our food industry rather than trying to turn it into something else. I just see the government completely silent on this. You know, there's a few little words here and there. But look at the first line in the agricultural bill when they talk about food safety, food security. The very first bullet point is, we will look on global markets for adequate supplies. They're looking overseas for these solutions, and agriculture isn't part of it. British agriculture really isn't part of it.
But when they say that they're not going to allow these lower standard imports in, I mean, I just don't believe them, because they're allowing tens of thousands of tons of oilseed rape into this country that is treated with neonicotinoid seed treatment. And I know they have to do that under the EU, but once we leave, are they going to stop that? I don't think they will.
Let's be clear as we can, Andrew. If they sought to prevent it, they wouldn't be doing a trade deal with America. So, you know, cut through all the rubbish. America, in fairness to America, if you listen to the ambassador, if you listen to Wilbur Ross, their, you know, trade secretary, they don't make any bones about it. They've said, we've got to change our standards. We've got to accept theirs. We've got to, you know, they use phrases like modernize and all the rest of it, but they're very clear. You know, if we want a trade deal with America, it would be done on American terms, not ours. And, you know, we really ought to accept that reality, whatever the government says. They'll want a trade deal with America, and agriculture is a sacrificial lamb.
Well, they hold all the cards. We've got, our hand is so weak.
Yep.
You think on that basis we'll be having hormone beef? I don't want to go the chlorinated chicken route, but the hormone beef was rejected here several years ago as a means of lowering costs of production of beef, do you think we'll be getting hormone-treated beef into the UK out of this deal?
Right, let's, I think that what will probably happen is, and the same with chlorinated chicken, is that they will try to exclude those for a period of years or something. So they'll say not in the first rush. But that's not the important thing, really. Only a relatively small proportion of American chickens are treated with chlorine, etc. And not all American beef is injected with these hormones, etc. There is plenty of cheap food produced in America that will come in without any standards. Talk to people about cereals. They can produce cereals about 25% lower cost than us, and they can produce poultry and beef cheaper than us. And the deal will be, I suspect, that we'll be told, oh yes, we're protecting your standards at the moment, but they'll allow other volumes in, and you'll find that those other more sensitive things will be pushed down the line a bit. America will not do a deal if they can't get their exports into this country. And we know that, and they know that.
What would be your advice, Sean, to a farmer now looking forward 2 or 3 years who may be sharing some of your views about maybe getting out of the industry and giving up?
Well, I think the first thing that farmers deserve is honesty. They need to be told exactly what the government intends and what exactly, so they can think about the future of their business. But I'm quite clear, if we had a government that was prepared to put in place a food policy, and by food policy, I mean one that's concerned with the production of food, not this Henry Dimbleby, I was going to say a rude word, but I won't, not this Henry Dimbleby thing which is dealing with health, nutrition and social affairs. If you're a farmer growing a damn potato, it's got nothing to do with obesity. We've got to stop labeling the farming industry as being somehow a problem for bad eating habits, etc. Producing food at affordable prices, wide choice, good quality is the basis of a healthy, affluent population, and the government should be focusing on that. If I saw the government coming forward with support, I'd say to a farmer, work out your options for the future. Can you, by working with other people, bring your costs down? Can you, by working with food processors, find markets for higher quality, better products, which I believe are there, etc.? And if the answer to those two questions is yes, I'd say you've probably got a future. If you are very high cost, if you are relatively inefficient, and if you think you're going to make your living out of planting trees, well, probably food production is not for you. In other words, I'd like to say, I think there is a positive future for the agricultural industry. I think in this country we have some of the best farmers in the world, but they really need the government to get behind them, and I don't believe it is at the moment.
Alan, you have a question?
Well, I had a couple of, yeah, I agree with most of what's been said so far. Just briefly on the US imports, I think, I mean, that's not going to happen immediately because we're coming up to the presidential election. So the government can simply say, oh, we can put that to one side because they're not going to get any trade agreement with the US now until after January, until after the US presidential election. The curious thing for me is really, you know, we've heard so much about fishing, you know. Fishing is one of the three big things that the government keep on banging on about as being one of the red lines. This deal, you know, this transition deal, and avoid no deal in line. But I mean, obviously the fishing industry, although it's totemic, is much smaller in terms of employment and GDP than farming. So why do we never hear anything about farming, yet we keep on hearing endlessly about the fishing industry, who in my view will probably also be sold down the river as well. Anyway, I thought I'd just throw that in. And sure, the third question is GM crops. I mean, I know in the past you've spoken up in favour of GM, and also I think, you know, probably be a good thing, gene editing for the UK. One of the benefits that's put forward from Brexit is, you know, the ability to go down the road of regulation, you know, regulating our own GM or gene edited crops outside of the EU. So what would you have to say on that one, please?
Right, let me preface my response by saying that agriculture really has no future unless it is prepared to embrace the fruits of science and technology. And in this country of ours, we do have, you know, some of the, when it comes to universities and research institutes, we really do have some of the best in the world, and we should be thinking about how we can make better use of them. Two issues, I think, that you raise. One problem is this: as long as Europe isn't prepared to accept GM crops, etc., we are going to be caught in the middle between a trade deal with America and other countries and indeed Europe. And I agree with you, I don't think there's going to be a trade deal with America this year now, but agriculture is a long-term business. It's not what happens next year, it's what's going to happen over the next 5 years plus. And I think there certainly will be a trade deal with America before 5 years are up. And then whose standards are we going to accept? If we accept American, we're going to have trouble in Europe, and vice versa. And if we accept both lots, we only increase the paperwork and the complications for people in the food industry. I live in hope that eventually Europe will embrace all the fruits of science and technology, and by the time it does, of course, I hope that we will be in a position to take advantage from around the world. But if I can be as clear as I can, part of a food policy would be to take on board the fruits of science and technology. And the other thing I would want to make as clear as I can is that I see no contradiction at all between an efficient, modern farming sector and the delivery of sustainable farming practices and very high standards. There's absolutely no contradiction at all. And we've got to stop people implying that it can be one or the other, because the government is running along with farmers at the moment and pretending they're going to protect their standards while secretly opening the door behind them to letting other people in. They need honesty. Farmers, they need to be told what's what, they need to be told what's coming, and they need to be told how to cope with it.
So on the fishing industry, do you have anything to say? Because there doesn't seem to be much dialogue between farmers and fishing, in my view.
Well, look, this is another madness, isn't it? The most of those little fishing ports, which, you know, are such an emotive thing, I think they account for about 6% of the fishing industry or something. Yeah. We also know that a lot of the fishing industry sold their quotas to the European fishing companies. And we also know that about 2/3 of the fish we fish in this country have to be sold to Europe. They're in a very vulnerable position, the fishing industry, and the government's led them down a certain path. And I suppose it's wondering at the moment how it's going to tell them things aren't quite as they expected they're going to be.
Yeah, okay,
Jim,
thanks.
Jim, you had something you wanted to say?
Yeah, I'm just curious as to why the opposition aren't making more of this, because this is an open goal for them, is it not?
A political question.
Well,
they're all in urban constituencies.
Well,
no,
yes,
well, I speak as a Lib Dem. You know, I'll lay my colours to the mast. I mean, I'm also, apart from being a journalist and analyst on agriculture, I'm also a Lib Dem, and you know, have been a parliamentary candidate. And it is a good question. To be honest, we were flying the flag very highly in the Euro elections, you know, where we gained 16 MEPs, and we thought we were riding to influence and stop Brexit, etc., etc. Since the general election, the the impact of that on the Lib Dems, we've been virtually silent. And so you've spurred me on to now under Davey, who is, of course, as urban as they come as an MP in South London, to remind him via Tim Farron and others of the farming issue, which I shall do and let you know. Okay.
Thank you.
No, I mean, you're right, Jim, because the difficulty is that people see farming as the same in some ways as fishing. They think it's a micro thing. But actually, when you look at every industry that ties into agriculture, particularly in constituencies like mine, everything relies on agriculture. From your local mole store where you get all of your equipment and all of those suppliers, then your machinery, your seeds, everything else. All of this is going to cause a massive contraction at the same time as we go through a massive COVID crash. So it does seem absolutely so bleak, the thought of doing this at the same time as dealing with the COVID fallout. But I agree. I think Ed is very urban. I have, as a Lib Dem, I have tried and I continue to try to badger him. So any help on that would be useful. Because I do, now the leadership election is over, we do need some more focus on that. Yeah. But Keir Starmer again is, the Labour Party is too quiet on this issue, and people seem to not recognise the connection between farming and food, as mad as that seems, including the government, because the agriculture bill hardly mentions food. So,
well, perhaps we need a footballer, Take up our cause.
I think with regard to Labour and the Lib Dems, with Labour and Starmer, they are desperately focused on recapturing the red wall seats. So it goes back to the philosophical principles and bedrocks there. That's what they're focused on, without going against the government too much and upsetting them too much, because a lot of their Labour to Conservative converts don't want to be told that they got things wrong. So they're playing a very careful game there and a long game there. However, with the Lib Dems, this is a complete sitter and a complete open goal for them, because Lib Dem traditional territory is in the anti-Westminster rural heartlands as well. It's West Country. So Ed should be absolutely all over this. He should be putting on his boots and doing a tour of the farms, because if he wants to reinvigorate Lib Dems from that 6%, it is going to be those Conservatives who are worried about the environment, farming, food standards, and everything rural and green, and all of that culture is what the Lib Dems need to be charging into. And because they were against Brexit, they can say, we told you so. They're perfectly positioned on all of that aspect. So I too will nudge Ed what I can do to pick up this mantle and pick it up really damn quickly, I think would be important.
Look, I'm very nervous about this getting around to politics, and no one was more against Brexit than me, but I think we have to recognise the world changed on the day of the election, and the point that I think people like Keir, I don't know what Keir Starmer thinks, but I think a lot of people say, that was the vote, get Brexit done, and we just have to live with that now. And we can point out how foolish it is, and we can point out that, we're not happy, but it's going to, the government has a mandate, the government's going to do it. I really thought when COVID arrived, they would at least delay the transitional period. I thought they would not want to be leaving Europe, with all the economic upset of that in the middle of a COVID recession. But no, the government said they're moving on, and I think we have to face that reality. So we should be trying to do whatever we can to help the agricultural industry against the background of Brexit. I really don't think you're going to stop Brexit. It's not going to stop. And if you take that view, you have to take a slightly different approach. If you think you can still fight to stop it, well, best of luck to you. But my judgment is, you're going to lose, and you're going to lose big time.
Sean,
No,
what's...
I wasn't suggesting at all that you try and stop Brexit from here. I was saying that if Lib Dems want to grow their influence, they can scare the Tories off screwing over the farmers and agricultural sector if the Tories think that in the Lib Dems they've got a third party waiting to pick up a lot of disaffected rural vote on that basis. That's where I think the leverage lies.
Yeah, sorry, I just said that, you know, we need to differentiate between no deal, you know, which the Lib Dems and Labour have both been banging on about stopping since December, and, you know, just lying supine and letting Brexit roll all over us like a steamroller or a tractor, okay?
I don't think the government will be, I don't know, we're just getting, we're in the land of speculation now.
Oh, yeah.
Think about those red wall constituencies. We know from the government's own statistics that they are going to be hit hardest by Brexit.
Yep.
We know that they're also being hit very hard by COVID-19. I don't think the government will want to contemplate for a moment food prices rising in those parts of the country. The government will, I think, in the end, be forced to do one of its basic deals with Europe. It won't be any good for the farming industry in the long run, but it will be the reality of a general election and indeed the position the government has managed to get itself in. It's not good for anyone, but that's their line of least pressure, I think. They're not going to be able to say to their red wall MPs, oh, we're going to have to put up with higher food prices in order to protect farming. That is not the government's priority at the moment, and it won't be.
But we're still very early on in this parliament. I mean, it's only going to be a year down the line. They've got 4 years then to try and sort it out.
Yeah.
Well,
I'm
with Sean. I think we have to prepare for the worst and hope for the best. So on that point, what do you suggest, Sean, happens to us livestock farmers? What would you be saying? What would you be doing if you had, what do you think cattle farmers and sheep farmers should be doing now, ready for next year?
Ready for next year? Well, in the short term, that die's already cast, isn't it? It's their breeding seasons, etc. I think that people have to be thinking more carefully about the longer term, and I think the best you can hope for at the moment is to try and get the government to give greater weighting to food production. So if I was a food or a beef, sheep, or indeed a farmer of any sort, or in leadership of the NFU, I would be pushing like mad, not for protectionism. That's as good as saying to the government, give up Brexit. And I judge it's not politically very sound. I think they should be saying to the government, if you're really serious about delivering a profitable Brexit for the food industry, you must help us. And give us a 5-year plan. Tell us what you're going to fund in terms of research and development and how you're going to help farmers to overcome this shock to their system. And that's the best you can hope for at the moment. Get the government at the 11th hour to admit that they need to put more into supporting the food industry and perhaps a little less into some of the other schemes which they are currently talking about in their agricultural bill, because that is not going to last. It's only guaranteed for 5 years, and you can bet your boots there'll be a lot less of it in the future. And the industry needs to support now to build up its productive base, to build better relationships with food processors, and to be able to go out and compete on world markets. That's its only long-term guarantee. And as long as you rely on protectionism, which is more or less what people are saying who are talking about standards, there's no industry in the world that survived protectionism. Look at our car industry. Look at every industry to try to protect itself. It doesn't work in the long run. You just got to make sure that you build on your advantages, and we have a lot of them in food and agriculture, and we recognise the challenges and ask for the government's help on that front. It's not happening. We're helping the government by beefing on about protectionism when the government's got absolutely no intention of ever delivering on that, because that would mean the end of Brexit for them.
Okay, any more questions?
I've just got one point, Liz. I was talking to someone the other day who's been on some sort of forum that with sort of future forum with the government about these basic payment scheme and ELMS and all that sort of thing. And the thinking in government is that you're going to have a formal qualification to get your money of an A level or higher, which means those people who haven't will have to collaborate with those people that have to allow them to access the money. And you're also going to have to do benchmarking. I mean, you should be doing benchmarking anyway, but I mean, when you look at some of these farms around the country, you just wonder, A, why they do it, and B, how they keep going. But you know, some of them will live on bread and water to carry on farming and sell their own kids. But you know, you think, and there's footpaths going through some of these farms, and people are looking at that and thinking this is the face of UK agriculture, and I'm just, you know, ashamed to be in the same industry with some of them. It's just appalling. They're the ones that should be getting rid of, not the family farms, which seem to be the most vulnerable.
Totally agree with that.
But they're probably not claiming much single farm payment.
Well, yes, I mean, well, yeah, it's a complicated one, but yes, it would be, it's not nice to wish anybody out of business, is it, really, to be fair? So,
But it is irritating when people who work in the public sector get on about farmers getting subsidies. Well, if you work in the public sector, your life is one long subsidy.
yes.
Should probably be those who are doing the better job that should be rewarded the most, in my opinion. But whether it's going to go that way or not, I don't know.
Any more questions from anybody? Because we've been going just about an hour now, so it's coming to an end. Has anyone else got any more questions?
Well, these deals that they're going to do, well, I used to be on the board of the HGCA, and when I was on it, they were trying to get barley into China. And it was a tortuous process that had been ongoing for years and years and years, and I still don't think they've got any barley into China now, and this is about 7 or 8 years ago. So, I mean, to think there's going to be these oven-ready deals that we're going to do with these countries, and there's that old economic adage that when you double the distance, you halve the trade. All these countries are on about 1 million miles away, and you've got 500 million people 20 miles away across the water. Why wouldn't you want to trade with them?
We have to accept a reality. The costs of producing agricultural commodities in this country are too high compared with the rest of the world. If we are going to conquer, or we're going to do well in the world, it has to be via food products. You know, I know it's almost a cliche now, but take a look at whiskey. We can sell as much of that as we like around the world, and it includes agricultural products, agricultural commodities. What we need is to have a whole suite of agricultural food products which have the same sort of provenance, the same sort of standards, and then I think we would do very well. No one's talking about that, and talking about doing trade deals for sheep or barley anywhere around the world. They're memos, and they'll never amount to anything very much. Whereas food products, we do have a chance. But where's the government's talk of joining up the food industry and agriculture? Where is the talk of getting the new skills that farmers need? Where is the talk about supporting science and technology? None of it's there. None of it's in that, just as a sentence here and there. There's no serious intent, and that's the sad thing.
Joined up thinking in government, Sean.
Sorry?
Sure. Joined up thinking and government don't really go together, do they?
Well, there's no reason why it shouldn't.
Well, no, well, I know, but...
Okay, so has anyone else got any questions? I think we've probably for now done this. We hope to get people and get farmers motivated to participate in the National Farming Day, and also to try and help farmers prepare for the possibility of, or the reality of, no deal or a very thin deal, and how that's going to impact on them. So anything that you can help in your publications by getting that message out there, that would be really useful. And thank you for attending today.
Okay.
Okay. Is it, the meeting closed, Liz?
The meeting's closing. Yep. Thanks very much, everyone.
Thanks
Okay.
very much.
Bye.
Cheers,
Bye.
Yeah, bye.